Today, we continue the updated Antifaithism series by talking about morality in the humanist model. In the previous video, Faith Destroys Morality, we learned that morality becomes impossible when it's based on a transcendent standard accepted by faith. A common argument says that evil cannot exist without a standard of good. Well, that's true, but is God required to have a standard of good? No. In reality, every standard is arrived at subjectively. Even the claim that God is the standard is a subjective conclusion. This is evident from the fact that there are over 1,000 Christian denominations, each with its own view of what God considers moral. In fact, it's doubtful that even two believers fully agree on what God has decided is right or wrong. The only reason a person believes God is a transcendent moral standard is because they were told such a standard must exist. The truth is that God was chosen as the standard, first by those who introduced the idea and then by those who were indoctrinated to believe it. In other words, God is subjectively chosen to serve as an objective authority. Once someone decides that a supernatural being defines morality, they must then accept whatever that being supposedly declares. This is why Christians have historically justified slavery, rape, and genocide in the Old Testament, and why they once justified slavery and murder during the Crusades and other points in history. The Bible clearly endorses these acts, which puts Christianity in a conundrum. Do we continue to endorse these immoral acts and go against our own conscience, or do we follow our conscience and do theological gymnastics to make excuses for God, as is common for Christians to do? In this case, Christians are no longer following their supposed standard. They are overruling God on these issues while pretending they aren't. This is one reason why I am an anti faithist. Faith destroys morality by making it impossible to question moral claims without putting yourself in a pretzel. As you can see, theism doesn't solve moral problems, it creates more of them. So let's talk about how morality works in the humanist model. If a moral standard is always arrived at subjectively, how do we build one that preserves freedom, encourages reason without dogma, and promotes empathy free from ulterior motives? An objective standard emerges once the goals and rules are agreed upon. Think of a game like chess, football, or Hungry Hungry Hippos. The only way to determine who wins or cheats is by playing according to the agreed upon rules, the objective standard for that game. When you play again, you can modify the rules and everyone agrees on a new objective standard. If you think about it, why aren't the rules of games and sports always the same if there is a transcendent standard? If sports only make sense because of God, then how is it that the rules are constantly being updated every season? The fact is, we decide the most logical goals and rules for each game. We can do this because we use the laws of logic inherent in the universe, laws that appear unchanging. These are things we define, not determine. Morality, however, much like games, does change. We determine it. Why? Because logic demands it. Contrary to religious claims, morality is not set in stone. It's not based on good and evil as absolutes, but on value judgments. Humans have deemed life valuable. We naturally desire the greatest possible well being and the least possible harm. Actions that promote those outcomes are labeled as good, and those that undermine them are labeled as evil. Of course, some outliers fail to recognize that harming others ultimately undermines their own well being. Most people understand that minimizing harm to others benefits everyone, because only when everyone pursues that shared goal can anyone fully benefit from it. Those who act against this principle must be restrained, their freedom limited, to protect the well being of others. This is because each person's rights end where another's begin. Naturally, each society or relationship will differ in its understanding of what promotes well being or causes harm, just as different games require different rules. Even in intimate relationships, a one size fits all morality doesn't work. What might be considered immoral in one relationship may not be in another. It depends on the mutually agreed upon boundaries and values within that relationship. Sometimes this calls for compromise. Flourishing within any community, small or large, works when sympathy and empathy are expressed with the recognition that each person has the same right as you do to dignity, fairness, and respect. Since we don't always get it right, we allow for the rules to change as we discover better ways to do things. We can learn when we're doing something that doesn't actually endorse dignity or respect if we listen to what others are saying. Healthy dialogue with the well being of everyone involved as the goal allows us to find ways to ensure everyone remains free to thrive in their own environments while respecting the environments of others. This can only happen when we realize that morality isn't some transcendent standard that everyone must bow to. Rather, it's a recognition that my rights end where yours begin and vice versa. Here are 7 brief statements that summarize why the humanist model is superior to the theist model. Number 1, grounded in shared humanity. Humanist morality starts with the recognition that we are all human beings with the same capacity to feel pain, joy, fear, and love. Because of this, moral responsibility is rooted in empathy and solidarity, not obedience to a higher power. Number 2, freedom and responsibility. Unlike faith based systems that reduce morality to divine command, the humanist model insists on personal freedom. Morality requires that people make choices based on reason and compassion, owning the consequences of their actions rather than outsourcing responsibility to God's will. Number 3, reason and evidence. Human ethics relies on examining outcomes in the real world. What reduces harm? What promotes flourishing? Instead of appealing to ancient texts or shifting dogma, humanist morality tests principles against lived experience and evidence. Number 4, universal and inclusive. Faith tends to divide people into insiders and outsiders, restricting compassion to the saved. In theory, everyone must bow to the standard dictated by their holy book, making a dictator's rules universal. Obviously, this isn't the case in reality since theists can never agree on what those rules are, but their ideal situation is that everyone just does what Simon says. Interestingly, humanism also insists morality applies universally, but in such a way where every person is owed dignity, fairness, and respect, regardless of belief. It isn't a one size fits all system. Number 5, authentic virtue. Good actions under faith often carry ulterior motives, securing heaven, avoiding hell, pleasing God. In contrast, humanist morality values virtue for its own sake, generosity because it alleviates suffering, honesty because it builds trust, kindness because it strengthens community. Authenticity replaces transaction. Number 6, dynamic but principled. Humanist morality adapts as our understanding of the world grows. Slavery, once widely accepted, is now condemned because we better understand human dignity. This flexibility isn't moral relativism, it's the ability to refine moral standards while staying anchored in empathy and reason. And number 7, true objectivity. Apologists claim only God gives objective morality. But in practice, divine morality shifts with interpretation and culture. The humanist model offers a more stable grounding, objective reference to human needs and flourishing. If an action harms well being, it is wrong. If it promotes well being, it is right. In conclusion, the humanist model shows morality doesn't need God at all. It emerges naturally from our shared humanity, our ability to reason, and our capacity for empathy. By focusing on real world consequences and universal dignity, humanism preserves what faith cannot: genuine moral responsibility. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, and support to help this channel grow. And until next time, live free.